Ah, new adventurers. I see that you received the letter. Welcome to the world of Barovia. I am Strahd von Zarovich, this world's ruler and burgomaster. I welcome you here. I'm sure that those in Barovia will welcome you with open arms. Go on, explore my lands, adventure as vast as you wish. Simply, I do wish to give you an invitation. There's a wedding to attend to, for myself and Tatiana to get married within 2 weeks' time. Do not be late. Hello everybody, my name is Alex Moxie, and I got to represent Strahd von Zarovich in the campaign novel of Dungeons & Dragons, Curse of Strahd. Now, I DM'd this game roughly 3 years ago now, and I wanted to take a good look back, as many of the players that I initially started with online are still close friends and a close group that we still play on every Friday night today. I feel like this single game solidified a lot of friendships. It broke a lot of ties that came with the stigmas of Dungeons and Dragons. And this game helped me really push the fact of horror and grim atmospheres into my later games. I made 7 major changes to Curse of Strahd from the original writing of this book. As you can see, I have lots of notations and notes for chapters and stuff like that, but I have 7 major changes and some tips and tricks to this book to help you run a much more memorable game, whether it comes to your players' backgrounds and stories, the grim aspects and horror that you'd like to implement into the game, and overall tips on bringing your Strahd von Zarovich to life. Now let's get into it. Now with tip number 1, altering the stories and the plot to fit characters' backgrounds. This is a pretty large one to kind of tackle, but you can do it prior to the game even starting. I would really recommend right off the bat, you need to get yourself a second book, either from a dollar store or some kind of other hobby store. Get yourself just a regular book to start writing the actual story of Curse of Strahd and those who have ties between each other in all of the towns. Go through chapter by chapter and find all of the people in all of the towns and how they are in relation to one another. From here, you are going to have a much bigger and broader aspect to the game itself. You're going to understand where there are plot holes, because the game itself is so large, but it is the biggest printing book that Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons can produce in a standard book like this. It comes out to about, I think it's almost 300 pages, and that's like the top end that they make for these books. So there are areas in the book itself to alter a bit of the story, still follow the direct plot line, but you can completely incorporate your characters' backgrounds no matter what kind of tall tales they'd like to tell. Whether it's parties that come from the old I don't know my parents kind of background, or those who've lost their memories, or they are searching for something, or on a basic adventure. There is some kind of way to solidify your characters' backgrounds straight into the story here. There's a lot of openings and areas to grip into. For myself, I used the Mad Wizard, who is, if you read the book with no spoilers, I won't tell you who it is, but I changed the dynamic of that character themselves. I left them to note that the Mad Wizard that went to fight Strahd von Zarovich one-on-one became the father of one of the characters. He was found later on in the campaign to give life and reference to a character that had been searching for their parents, to give the answers. From there, their parents, the mother, could see visions and saw her son being struck down by Strahd. So the father himself went out to adventure to go slay him himself before the fact of her vision came to life. Stuff like this can really amp and pull your characters into the story and your players. So I'd really advise that you read through the book, definitely get yourself a second book, and write down every chapter, write down the plot and all of the characters' names in every chapter you find, whether it's Vallaki, all of the Vistani, even the underlying non-main characters, the abbot, the abbey. Write them all down and try to cross-examine where you think you can fit players in. With the werewolf den, you could have a family member who's trapped, or they hold some kind of legacy item that your adventurer has been longing for, whether it's some kind of symbol of gratitude or some kind of virtue to a god. You can implement all of these things into this game, and I really challenge you to do so. Another player character we had was Nova, a holy paladin whose background was that her daughter has come under some kind of spell or curse that has made her fall asleep. She has not been able to awaken, but ever since then, she has prayed to a god that made her a paladin to overwatch her for protection. Now, in the instance here, Strahd has sent out some of the Vistani to capture that energy from the girl, bring her back in a magical lantern, still asleep, but he wants to use the lantern and the girl's power with the god to split the realm and leave Barovia. This really entices the characters to start acting quicker. They need to have their motivations gripped. The ways that you can implement characters and their backgrounds will really strive the characters to wanting to complete tasks. And I think with such a overwhelmingly large villain like Strahd von Zarovich, who just oppresses the land of Barovia, I think you will find that really bringing your characters' backgrounds into the game will really develop and make memorable moments for you and your players. Now, this is a horror-driven campaign. There are lots of moments to give you lots of freedom on how you want to describe the horror that goes on, to whether it's the civilians of Barovia, the horrific events that happen to those who have passed, or those who are being ambushed currently at the time. Now, amplifying moments of dread and horror take some certain kind of finesse, but I'd like you to really challenge yourself and slow the pace down when stuff like this happens. If you want to introduce the moments where you're first introducing a vampire spawn, or even a subtle thing like a werewolf for the first time, I challenge you to slow down that moment. And a lot of things that bring and grip people into horror is not seeing the danger that's ahead. So in the moment when people first come to Barovia and the pastor has his boy down below the church's floor, and you can only hear the patterns of the child's screams, that helps. Not only does the dungeon master understand how to play on horror, but it understands from the player's point of view that all horror isn't going to be head on. Continue with these moments. Use the senses that you can develop with your players. Even if you're playing from afar and online, you can still interpret moments of depth. You can try to anticipate their movements within the game and try to analyze how to plot characters meeting in very unplausible and dire circumstances. Even if your players have encountered a few of the same creatures a number of times, you can continue that type of horror where I had a moment that players were climbing a tower, but I introduced the fog mechanic into the game where there was only shrouds of creatures that were climbing to the rocks against the building. And even if they looked out the window, it was only like a shadowy figure with treacherous screams coming out of them while still climbing the bricks in almost a bloodthirsty howl. It's a way to try to amplify the senses of the player. By not allowing them to fully see what the threat is ahead of time, it still gives a lot of opportunity to you to really fill out that moment of horror. I not only challenge you to do moments like this where you are keeping the creatures in the dark, but I'd also like to challenge you to have moments of gore and really try to delve into the moments of deep sacrifice that are in the chapters of the Death House, especially when they get down to the depths. If you read over the intro chapter, if you're starting at level 1, I challenge you to make that chapter right near the end a little bit more gory. I want it to be a bit more of a sacrificial area, and you're able to play on the fact that death is not clean and death is terrible here, where death is the thing that people are running away from. It's not just the gripping horrors, but it's the terrible ways that people have died here. Now again, use all of this with conjecture with your party. Do talk to them session 1 or session 0 as you may call it, and really try to understand what your players' values are. If people get squeamish over certain things like blood and innards and decapitation and stuff, or limbs being severed, maybe dial some of that back for those players. But if your players have no boundaries, definitely go right into it. Really try to give them that experience, but try doing your best at scripting certain sections that are not from the novel and write it out yourself, something that may inspire you from moments of the game. And I really want you to tackle it head on. Really give it your all in this one. Now, this is a very interesting one. A proper place to spend their gold and buy magical items. Why would such a thing exist in such a impoverished place like Barovia? Now, admittedly, for a while, I saw that my characters and my players were kind of getting stuck with what they had, and knowing that the fortuned items that they can claim during Curse of Strahd are powerful, I really want to give my players still a lot of freedom to really express their characters and the things that they really wanted to develop with them from the get-go. So here I'd like to represent my character, Tarku. This is a magical item vending seller, and he travels from spot to spot picking up abandoned homes. Just to understand, he can sell any magical item to the players, and he cannot be robbed or stolen from. Tarku is a being who's magical and mystical. He's a high-level wizard, a conjuration wizard of kinds, who can almost create the magical items that people search for with special terms. Prices may be a little bit higher, considering he's out in the middle of nowhere, and knowing that he is the only vendor that is out there. The thing with having some kind of vendor like this where you think it's going to break the game, you think that party members are going to get these absolutely game-breaking items, I'm going to tell you that the party, until they get to Strahd's castle, isn't going to be very rich. They're going to have to give up a lot of indifferent loot and stuff like that to even try to supply themselves with high-level gear. I'd really recommend trying this out. My party ended up selling quite a few things using the money they had to get a ring of spell storing. If you don't know, that just allows one of the spellcasting members to put some spells carried from their spell bank into a signet ring or some kind of ring that they can carry and use at a later time. It amplifies their character a bit, but it doesn't break the game. There's lots of different things you can challenge your players with more deadly encounters and things like that to offset it. I really think that allowing your players to openly shop in Barovia, considering it's such a realm that's so far away and so distant, that maybe somebody like this could just be passing through in the right moment at the right time. The only other areas you find in Barovia to shop around at are very mundane vendors who sell anything from the adventuring gear, which in terms is decent, but it doesn't really amplify and really give substance to characters and players who really want to push the boundaries of what their characters can do. So it's an interesting one, but it made a really interesting, memorable moment of shopping. They were allowed to go in, kind of explore and do as they wish. I plotted mine out to be like an empty library. It was almost this abandoned building on the outside, but once you entered into the building, there was shelves with rows of only slits of paper with images upon the other side of them. And you have to go to the vendor Tarku to actually redeem the item itself. So players had a good time going in and learning how buying and selling actually worked. As well with that, if they weren't able to find what they wished for, there was a pad of paper and a pencil on his desk as well, and they were able to draw or articulate what they were looking for. He knew exactly what it was, and for the right price, he was willing to make a deal. Now, when talking about the Druids and making more difficult encounters, it's a little bit of a trade-off. You got to understand the reasoning behind the Druids in the first place, and you have to create new ideas for these encounters. As the Druids are met because of the Mordekov family, outside of that, they don't exactly play a massive role. On top of that, when I played the game, this book, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, hadn't been produced or out in circulation yet. You can get this book, and it is directly related to the horrors that happen in Ravenloft itself. It has monster manuals and all kinds of stat sheets for new monsters that you could throw at your players during your game of Curse of Strahd. It's something I'd highly recommend if you were to play in today's standard. But when it came to those Druids and making these more difficult encounters, there's a few that stand out among the rest. Number one, the climbing all the way up to the temple. Knowing that the mountainside has this long, treacherous, cold journey, but no encounters in between, really struck a nerve with me, where there was so much that happened between a small village, between one another, and going up a treacherous mountain to go visit this temple that just was abandoned for so long. It really struck a nerve enough for me to build an entire encounter around it. The fact is that they're supposed to get some kind of clothing to wear that keeps them against the weather's wrath going up the mountainside. Now, that may be true, but it doesn't mean that the conditions themselves don't make the travel hard enough. Their clothes may keep them from being killed by the weather, but it doesn't mean that the weather itself doesn't inhibit trouble to the actual travel. What I did amongst the mountain was I built a cavern system for them to go through, and the Druids themselves believed in a creature within the mountain, building some kind of cavernous maze, treasures along the way, and a little bit of drama can be sparkled in there. Now, I'd like to let it off to you with that one, whether you have a pack of elite winter wolves that have broken away from the regular werewolves down in Barovia and moved up to the mountainside to try to challenge themselves and grow into bigger, badder beasts. You can put some kind of ethereal thing up at the top. You can make a cavernous encounter like that, but the Druids themselves get this slim moment within the book, and I wanted to really flesh them out a bit more. This virtue of sacrifice that they live by, and I really wanted to throw some more splice in there. So again, it was a interesting encounter. My characters had a lot of fun and a lot of laughs at the type of druids that they encountered. But again, use the stat block that's given to you about random encounters. I'd say amplify some of those numbers. I ran a party of 5, and most encounters were cakewalk at all points of the campaign. There was a lot of the mundane enemies just getting killed outright. Now, they were playing with the expanded material. Like, Ravenloft wasn't out yet, but a lot of expanded material already was. When Curse of Strahd was released, that came alongside of just the player's handbook and the monster manual. So you just had the base classes to kind of go on and the base races. Now we have tons of different races, variable races, all kinds of different classes and multi-classing and different builds that run themselves through this type of campaign. If you do have those kind of power gamey characters or players that you have in your campaign, I'd recommend either upping some of those numbers or going to a third-party source like Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft and picking out some of the monsters out of here. One last area I really like you to kind of amplify and give a little bit more of a touch to is when they go meet Babala Saga. Understanding how she is a witch of some kind in her swamp, do add some kind of muck monsters. Add a little bit more to the terrain in the way of the battle. They just are going to go in there and start slinging. And if it's only at one enemy, she's going to get focus fired very, very quickly. Try to make more of the terrain, more of the fight. She does live in a swamp. Think of thickets and trees and where you're sludging your feet through, just trying to keep up. While a witch like herself knows it like the back of her hand. She knows how to swim her feet through the swamp faster than those who don't live there. Really try to develop your encounters is what I'm trying to say. Really try to dive into the fact that normal parties today and these power gamey builds are going to fight a lot of the encounters in your book, and you are going to feel underwhelmed when 2 or 3 turns in, your big bad encounter has already been obliterated. Now, when talking about Strahd von Zarovich's already passed Groom and his 3 brides, we got Ludmilla, Anastasia, Valentia, and Esther. These are the 4 characters that within the book only get a single paragraph written for them. They wait at the bottom of Ravenloft, awaiting you basically for when you go to Strahd's tomb. I found this as being a massive cop-out. It's either they did not have enough time to put in their original material scripted in with this campaign book, or it was just a open sourced spot for people to get really adventurous on a new idea and implementing them into the story. These 4 individuals should have all of their own personalities, all of their own quirks and things that they are striving for. Think of Strahd as kind of the leader to an army, and these are the military veterans, and they lead a bunch of pact of infantry with them. Think of them as the middle people before they even go encounter Strahd themselves, coming to understand what it's like to fight not a vampire spawn, but a true vampire themselves. Give them extra abilities, make them wizards, make them good fighters, and make them have the abilities to really hide within the darkness. They're able to escape their vulnerabilities and stuff like that. They're able to try to contradict the players into trying to deceive one another and trying to spill over what Strahd has taught them. They don't come alone. They come with a welcoming party of other vampire spawns. Think of them as just the band of ruffians right underneath Strahd that kind of is there to help play with the party a bit more. Understand that these 4 individuals are supposed to be here to screw with your party. Like all over Barovia, they are almost like the mini bosses. They are subjected to toy with players, really try to fool with their plans, not be this massive cutthroat down the line. They're going to just sever ties and kill the party. Strahd wants that desire himself. He doesn't allow the vampires and his mistresses or his groom to actually do the killing unless they are told that they can. That is part of becoming one of Strahd's legions. They are here to make it much more difficult for the party to try to advance. They are here trying to dismantle plans, eavesdrop, gain information for Strahd anywhere that they can. Do make these encounters memorable, hilarious, and funny all at the same time. My party themselves said that they were out to collect all the pieces, meaning that they wanted to strike all of the vampires down with holy weapons, turn them to dust, and put them in vials. Their conquest was led to 3 out of 4. The Groom was actually more of the charismatic and caring one, saying that he didn't want to die, that eternal life wasn't exactly for him either, but he wanted to venture back out and relive the life he had. So he wasn't out there exactly plotting against the party or anything, but it gave them a bit of insight that not all of these enemies that are within Strahd's castle are terrible or bad. Some of them have been misled. Some of them had been just coached by Strahd into thinking a certain way, at least for a certain time being. Implement the groom and the brides themselves. Bring them to the dinner party. Have them at the wedding. Ensure that they are there throughout the entire campaign. Now, I don't know how I'm going to fill out all of this into one chapter and keep this video somewhat at a watchable rate, but the changes to Strahd von Zarovich himself were that he was more obsessed than anything else, that he was willing to sacrifice all of the land that he had, every person that was under his foot, any person who had challenged him before in the past or in the future, to marry Tatiana, the woman that he loved from 1,000 years ago, when which he lost his soul and humanity to. He would give anything to have her and be gone out of the realm of Barovia. This grand obsession would lead to all kinds of monstrous moments where he was willing to just sacrifice anybody within the way just to have a glimpse at that future. These two in combination make Strahd feel indestructible within the realm of Barovia, that nothing has ever challenged his strength before, that there is no creature and no adventuring party that is going to take him down. His overwhelming confidence cannot be overstated, that any kind of insult from the party that gets thrown at him almost gets dismissed as childlike, or even just like remarks that nobody will remember because they will be buried under the ground as he steps over them, going into another realm. The idea here with Strahd was that he had battled some of the parents and some of the beings or characters' family beforehand, and single-handedly struck them down one by one, thinking the same idea that he can take the children of those same adventuring party, bring them here and clash their minds together, getting them to separate and slowly taking them out one by one. Do remember that the invitation was sent to random adventuring party members to bring them in just to pass the time. To pass the time waiting for Tatiana's soul to reinvigorate into a new body. The party that is here is not meant to make it as far as they do, where in Strahd's mind, he thinks that even they will be a part of the wedding, and even they may be part of the feast. They may be part of the main course. Only a few times did I have Strahd really announce his power to the rest of them. You've got to understand, when you are a god in a realm, you can control not only the weather, the patterns that happen at times in your favor, but you can also cascade things into the sky. You want to be able to manipulate your environment. Strahd von Zarovich, being a god of the realm, Barovia, and an eternal god lord vampire, you've got to understand that he is just there to manipulate players and use all of the things that they are either self-conscious about or things that they are striving for, and belittle them, make them think much less of themselves and their counterparts. He is strong in his tone, and he is, of course, prepared with his knowledge. Somebody like him doesn't confront somebody without doing his research. He's done this before, and he'll do it again until the moment comes where Tatiana comes back to life and he can renounce his love and leave the realm. Now, some may argue that the stat book in the Curse of Strahd novel is weak, and I'd agree, knowing that he is blocked out just like that. But at the time, like I said before, it was when the player's manual had just been introduced. So some of the first line classes, and let's say an adventuring party of 3, would have a hard time with him, knowing that Strahd himself can vapor right through the walls of Castle Ravenloft with his lair actions and his ability to regenerate like life points. As the battle goes on, you can create a long-standing fight that really drags out your party's resources before they even make a real mark into him. But with that, and allowing my party to have access to magical items, giving them all the way up to level 9 when they hit the castle itself, as I introduced new additional areas and chapters into the game, I knew that I had to bolster my Strahd von Zarovich up. I made him something called the Blade of Shadows. This was something that he embarked on when he first became the Dark God. And my idea here was that he used it to win part of the war that he had, and every life that he had taken with the blade, he is able to smite with it. He is able to smite with the soul that is stuck within his Blade of Shadows. Normally, when you are running Curse of Strahd, he just uses hand-to-hand combat. He uses his bite, and he uses magic to kind of persuade or try to bring death to the party. But here, a strong, heavy-wielding blade really brought a lot of tension to the players, seeing that he can lock out a lot of damage on a lot of multi-hits. When I recalibrated my Curse of my Strahd von Zarovich, he was technically a CR 23 versus what is in the book. He was no cakewalk, and my players felt it. But I think something like that will be memorable. I think leaving an easy encounter, especially if you see your party becoming able to wipe out a lot of the earlier encounters, you're going to want to try to make that long-standing, strong encounter. Not something that feels long and strung out, but you want that battle to really mean something, where it is a life or death. Everybody who has come before you has failed. Is this the party that is willing to stand against darkness and evil itself? Are they willing to put their full life on the line and every bit of blood and energy they have to dispose of darkness in the final hour? That's for you to decide. Now, in the book of Curse of Strahd, the inclusion of the Dark Gods is very loosely kind of looked over. Vampire, being one of the eternal gods who gave Strahd his eternal life, is actually very different from the dark gods that give him power over the land of Barovia and keep him trapped in there. It's interesting to note, and you have to read very fine between the lines, that these are two very different beings, and this is something that gives Strahd so much of his strength. So Vampire is a ancient old vampire who gave Strahd the ability to spread the vampiric disease amongst many, and he is the original vampire to slay, with the dark god behind him backing him up. Now, the dark gods of Barovia are very different, but they are ambiguous and allow you to kind of play with them as you wish. The Dark Gods of Barovia, for me, ended up being 4 children. One wearing a mask of a witch, one wearing the mask of a werewolf, one wearing the mask of a vampire, and one wearing the mask of the undead. These were very simple children, and they only showed themselves in large moments of dark and disparity. You could learn information about them and the powers they were able to give to Strahd, like being able to control the weather and being able to manipulate the environment of the realm. He became its lord, and the idea that they gave him the power because they felt like the love he had for Tatiana was a great thing for the realm to flourish under. Let alone did they misunderstand the power and the repercussions it came with giving Strahd that power, and then him turning so vengeful after the death of Tatiana. Now, the idea here behind giving the dark gods some kind of image for your party is that the dark gods are actually on not everybody's side. With death is not the end of a character in this game. We had a player die on session 7, outright dead. They died within Vallaki because they were running their mouth too much, and they got invited to try to explain the things that they were trying to say, like heresy, and they ended up getting outright killed without the party even being present. It was here that I was able to make a moment with the dark gods and move their body or their soul into a new body with the power of the dark gods. They have the ability to influence the dead after you have reached your time of death, I guess. So the spirits that go beyond can live again and continue to live, but it doesn't mean that they don't want something in return. What it does mean is that Strahd gained this power for a specific reason. To note that if they were to just go and kill Strahd von Zarovich, finish him off, and ensure that he is going to no longer plague the existence of Barovia with his tendencies and the darkness that he overcasts on the world, you've got to understand the dark gods want somebody to replace him. And where a lot of power gamey people say, I would love to rule a realm and really have the power that Strahd has to conduct over the weather, that person's going to again be locked within Barovia. And if they don't have the power of Vampire, their time is still limited. The only reason Strahd is allowed to live as long as he can is because of the power of Vampire, not because the power of the dark gods here. To understand and really try to divide the fine line between the two, where Strahd will not die indefinitely with the power of Vampire behind him still. The dark gods are the ones that lock him and keep him enslaved, as he calls it, within the borders of Barovia itself. They have claimed him down to rule the land and be the only ruler of it. Now with the power of living for eternity and waiting for his lost long love to return, this has made a bit of a big problem for the dark gods to try to deal with, but they are now not strong enough to intervene and take him out. I'm not saying that they want to intervene and help the party gain all this access to new godly and unworldly power, but what I am saying is that death is not the end. Be prepared with some kind of imagery of the dark gods. You can make it some kind of shadow. You can make it some kind of snake. You can make it something as simple as I have. The group of the 4 children here wearing the masks that represent the things that happen in Barovia, those who are undead, those that are ruled by vampires, those that rule under as werewolves, and those that roam alone as witches, really helped bring life to the idea that the dark gods are symbiotic with Barovia itself. I really liked developing the idea of that beforehand, and with Vampire, I'm gonna recommend in a big way that if they do end up striking Strahd down, that there has to be some kind of ritual ceremony to branch away the power of Vampire away from Strahd. Like I said, he is eternal. He has the power of 2 gods on his side. Maybe the dark gods want to give the power to someone new, but Vampire does not. Vampire sees the legacy that Strahd is creating, and if he builds an army of some kind or strengthens the ability for Vampire himself, and then is able to finally leave the realm with some kind of aid on another side, well, only Vampire gets stronger. He doesn't care about the foolish other dark gods against him. That's all that he would care about. So all I'm trying to say is understand that there's a difference between the two. Make it a big discerning difference between the two as well. Don't make both vampires. Don't make them both after power. Make one symbiotic with the realm and another is trying to strive for power. It's a conflict that's going on between the gods, and Strahd is benefiting from both. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you very, very much for supporting the channel and continuing watching here. Again, this was one of my favorite campaigns to run, and I was almost fearful of running my next game, which we have all pre-recorded, The Lands of Lumoria. It has a lot of dark, grim atmosphere as well, but it's introduced a lot of cosmic horror to go along with it. And I think it turned out quite well. I do think that Curse of Strahd is the best written Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons campaign for 5th edition you can buy off the shelves. Now, there is a lot of extra material you can get for it. You can get Dungeon Master guides. There's tons of influence on the internet about things that you can do to change the game. These are some big things that I personally changed into the game that I hope you can take some value in. And I understand that Curse of Strahd is pretty old now, and he was around back in what, first edition or second edition, and this was just like the recreation of it. I want you to try to fall in love with the villain. And where most people want to hate on the villain, as the dungeon master, you have to understand the complexity that he has behind him, how much he just wants to be this individual. And I want you to envelop the character, become that person, become it just when you're at the table, and when you go home and think about it at night, really try to analyze and ensure that you're getting the right mindset for it. He has never been taken down. He has the power to strike down anybody in his realm or anything that comes in his way. Really go into that cocky, long-lived nature that nothing is going to hold him back. So, again, thank you very much for watching. This has been a long time awaited video that I've been wanting to do, and stay tuned for more material. Thank you very much.